Good morning. We just discovered the candles aren't wax. That was the issue. And as the last time, the church service goes a lot quicker when you're given the message. All right. So this is the second Sunday of Advent. As the bulletin cover says, we are preparing the way for the arrival of Christ. I'm going to talk a little bit today about preparing for certain other things. And I want to thank Kyle Stern again for helping me get all my visual aids ready for the sermon. She's a great help, as most of you know, I'm sure. So, yesterday, December 3rd, was my birthday. What a birthday present for me to be standing up here the next day. When Pastor Dwayne asked me, I'm like, oh, December 3rd's my birthday. Can't I get that weekend off? But anyway, it worked out all right because it actually kind of pertains to what I'm talking about. At my age, I would prefer just to not think about it being my birthday. But turn the clock back to 1991, a long time ago, and Betsy Feather, me, was turning 16 years old. That was a long time ago, but I still remember one of my first driving lessons in our Jeep Cherokee, 1983, that my dad took me on, my preparation for getting my license. Now let's get some perspective. When I turned 16, you could get your learner's permit 30 days before your birthday, and then you could test for your license on your birthday. Back then, that seemed like a great idea, and a lot of my friends did that, but I don't think it's a good idea at all right now. Because my son's 13, and I wouldn't be ready for him to be driving in 30 days. When I turned 16, it was December 3rd, like I said. But I didn't have time to go get my license, and Mara, you can attest to why I wouldn't have had time. What season is it? Basketball season. And the other reason was our Jeep, it was a 1983 Jeep, and it was a manual stick shift, 4-speed. And that's all we had. All I wanted was for us to have an automatic, but we did not have an automatic. How many of you know how to drive a stick or learn to drive on a stick? Good, more than I thought. So back to my driving lesson. My dad took me to the high school. That was always our area that we learned to drive, parking spaces and all that. And I thought I was doing really great. We were driving around. I was parking, feeling confident, shifting okay. And he switched seats and he drove me out. And you know how Bean Hill, there's the windy way and then there's the straight way. Well, he pulled out and went towards the long sloping way. And he pulled the Jeep there. He put it in neutral. He put the e-brake on. And he said, okay, you need to put it in first and go up the hill without stalling it, without drifting back. And I was thinking, why do I need to learn how to do this to take my test? Like, it's going to be flat where we're taking my test. And he's like, well, what about the hill in Martinsburg at the square? Don't you ever think you're going to hit a red light there? I'm like, oh, yeah. And then I thought, I'll just go around the square till I get used to it. I don't have to go to the square ever. I'll just go all the way around it. So as you can remember and I'm sure realize, I stalled it many times. I drifted back many times, probably ended up at the bottom of the hill. I don't remember at all. Tried to start it in the wrong gear, and I didn't even know what gear I was in half the time. I'm sure there were lots of tears, and I'm sure a little yelling took place if I know my dad. And all this happened many times. I don't even know if I was able to do it when we went out that time, but I eventually did. So as I said, our Jeep was a 4-speed, so you only had 4 gears and reverse and neutral. When you're shifting, you try to be as smooth as you can because you don't want to skip the gears, otherwise it gets very jerky. And the Jeep was really jerky. It was an older Jeep. The newer cars, even when I had my Mustang, the gears were not jerky when you messed up. And after all that practice, I don't even remember when I got my license. I just know it was in the spring because basketball would have been over. I played a lot of sports growing up, but basketball was always my favorite. That's why I didn't want to miss anything. I loved it, which is why I never missed a practice or a game. But my dad was always my biggest critic. After every game, we always discussed the games and my performance on what I did wrong and some of the things I did right. I don't know how or why it happened, but he would always use different gears to say how I did, such as first gear, not so good, fourth gear, pretty great. That's just how he said it, and I got the message, and I understood it, and I listened. It made me work a lot harder. Doesn't work for everybody, but it did for me. As I continued to play in high school, I got a lot of third and fourth gears, especially my junior and senior years of high school. As I was thinking and praying about this message, the thought came to me one Sunday. Actually, I was sitting back there listening to a sermon about what gear we all are in our faith journey. Are we in first gear, just starting out? Are we in second gear, on the move, but pretty slow still? Third gear, well on the way, involved with church things, helping with Sunday school. Fourth gear, focused on one thing, God and only Him, and how to get to heaven. Do we ever get there? Maybe some of us are in neutral or reverse for one reason or another. The scriptures I chose for today talk about perseverance, pursuing righteousness, godliness, and having doubts too. All of those things can and probably will happen on our journey to get to heaven and be closer to God. It is a journey, not a sprint. My brother's doing a lot of 50-milers and 100-miler runs, and I tell him he's crazy every time, but it's definitely not a sprint to go that long. It's a journey. It isn't going to be a smooth ride. We aren't always going to be cruising in fourth gear. In the Bible, I was trying to think who I thought was in fourth gear, and obviously there were a lot of people I could have thought of, but right away Noah came into my mind, that he had such a long journey till he reaped any of his rewards. Hebrews 11:7 says, "By faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith." I found a little video about some other people, some of who I thought of also, that had great faith in the Bible. And if you can play that video.
A Hall of Fame is a place that honors people that are exceptional at what they do. It exists to remind future generations of the greatness of these people from the past. Did you know that God has a Hall of Fame to remember the extraordinary people of faith who were written about in the Old Testament? And we can find that Hall of Fame in the New Testament of the Bible. Hebrews 11 tells us that faith is the confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. It gives us assurance about things we cannot see. This faith is what gave people in the old days great fame. This faith is what puts them in God's Hall of Fame. By faith, Abel gave his best to God. By faith, Enoch walked with God and was a friend of God. By faith, Noah listened to God, obeyed God, trusted God, and did what's right. It was by faith that Abraham followed God, and that even Sarah, Abraham's wife, believed that God would keep his promise. It was by faith that Isaac promised blessings for the future to his sons, Jacob and Esau. And by faith, Jacob blessed his sons and worshiped God. By faith, Joseph believed that God would guide him and see him through every troubled time. By faith, Moses looked forward to the great reward that God had in store for him and led the people of Israel out of captivity. It was by faith that Rahab was not destroyed with the people in her city who refused to obey God. And it was by faith that Joshua led the people of Israel. All of these people became famous for their faith, yet none of them received all that God had promised. For God has planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. So since God has given us His Hall of Fame of people who have gone before us and had great faith despite hard times, let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who makes our faith perfect, so that one day God may say, "Well done, good and faithful servant," and we may be initiated into His great Hall of Fame.
Thanks. So what did we hear there? They followed God, they had faith in God, but they didn't always get their rewards right away. It took time. It was a journey. They had to keep doing that kind of stuff to get to where they wanted to be, which was heaven. So I wanted to try and find someone that I could relate to in current times of who would be in fourth gear. And obviously I thought of pastors, deacons, Sunday school teachers, but it's Christmas time and my mind drifted and it went to this. Who knows what house this is or what movie this is? Emily, what movie is it? National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. This is probably my all-time favorite Christmas movie, maybe even movie in general of all time. I laugh every time we watch it, and we always watch it more than once this month, let alone sometimes throughout the year. I actually just watched it yesterday because I had the house to myself. So, for those of you who haven't ever watched it, Clark Griswold is the main character. He's the dad, and he's just a regular working guy who's trying to make Christmas the happiest time for his family. A fun, old-fashioned family Christmas is all he wants. He invites all the grandparents to stay at the house who don't get along with each other well at all. And then, of course, Cousin Eddie shows up with the big monstrosity of an RV and his wife and kids. I thought of him because he was definitely in fourth gear, wanting to make the best Christmas for his family. This picture shows that he wanted the best decorated house of anyone around. It even shuts down the power grid in town when he finally gets it to turn on. What's the line? 250 strands of lights, 100 individual bulbs per strand, for a grand total of 25,000 imported Italian twinkle lights. And after many trials, he finally gets it lit. And I just want to put a plug in for the women out there. His wife figures it out. Then his father-in-law says, standing beside him as they're admiring the house, "Clark, the little lights, they aren't twinkling." Clark tries everything to make it a perfect Christmas. He wants the biggest tree, the best looking house, the best dinner, the perfect Christmas bonus to spend on an in-ground pool for his family, but nothing goes right. Ellen, his wife, at one point in the movie says, "What can I say? It's Christmas, and we're all in misery." He keeps trying the whole movie, though, at one point even admitting that things can't get any worse. We need to take from that, life isn't easy or perfect. It isn't always easy to follow God, to pursue godliness, righteousness, faith, love, gentleness. But we need to keep pursuing God. A lot of people don't. At the end of this movie, their house has been destroyed by a bunch of different other things, and they're standing on the lawn, and he looks out, and they want to know what this bright light is in the sky, and they say it's the Christmas, or Clark says it's the Christmas star. And then he remembers what Christmas really is about. Sometimes the best comes out in people at Christmas, and sometimes the worst. This season shouldn't be stressful. We should be focused just on God. Everything else will fall into place. Getting back to my driving lesson, when you're driving a stick shift, do you stay in one gear? No. You have to shift to keep going faster and smoother, shall we say. If you leave here and go to Altoona in first gear, it's going to take you forever to get there. Why on earth would you not keep moving in your faith journey then? If you don't make time for God in the good times, are you going to make time for God in the bad times? Or are you going to reach for something else? If we're only doing the minimum, how are we going to make it to heaven? As Isaiah said the other week during his sermon, we have no idea when he's coming back. No idea whatsoever. Are any of us doing everything we can to be the best Christian example we can? In my first message, almost a year ago now, I told you about how my life was the past 2 years. It was easy for me to lose faith and stop on that journey towards God and turn away. It's hard to keep going, but isn't it going to be worth it when we actually get there to the end? When the setbacks of life come hard at you, we need to be strong in our faith, to rely on it and not turn from it. When you're on a lifelong journey of preparing for heaven, you need to have a church family. prayer, the Bible to turn to. People who don't believe in God or don't believe in going to church, a lot of times will say that we're all hypocrites that go to church. But one thing I learned from Scott and Kyle's Sunday night Bible study was from a video we watched, and I don't remember if it was Robert Morris or the Navy SEAL guy, but he said, if we let hypocrites come between us and God, the hypocrite is closer to God than we are. So we're here, God's there, and we're letting the hypocrite be here. The hypocrite's closer to God than we are. My mom worked at the courthouse for over 20 years, and she saw a lot of heartache and sadness in that time. But the judge that she worked for, when sentencing someone, whether it was for a crime or substance abuse issues, she would tell them if they don't change their life, they were going to be right back in her courtroom again. You need religious support and faith to do that, to make that change. You need that powerful change in your life to get you through each day. Maybe we don't realize it, but we all need this church family. We need it to get better with our relationship with God. As Christians, we should be trying to progress in our faith journey. We should always be looking for new opportunities to learn and teach others about God and our relationship with Him. Church and God should be a priority in our life, not an afterthought. If you're lacking something this Christmas season, maybe start there. Make sure you're devoting yourself to God first, and then the rest will fall into place. When the Jeep was drifting down Bean Hill, and I was flipping out, I'm sure, I needed to just put it in first gear and go. When you're not where you want to be in your spiritual life, you need to put it in gear and go, or you'll never be any closer to God than you are now. We might drift backwards at times when we come to a bump in the road or a hill, but we need to take the first step and keep going, like when God told Peter to step out of the boat. Otherwise, we'll be right where we are now, a year from now.